Socratic teaching. Now, I've taken on the board and put down the who, the what, and the who of Socratic teaching. The discussion group that we've talked about earlier is essentially aimed at two kinds of groups. It's aimed at outreach. We're looking for people who like to think, who like to discuss, and who want to know more about liberty. Many of the people who are involved in a discussion group do not come in the door ready to label themselves as believers in liberty. Most of them have a certain curiosity about liberty. And I certainly share the opinion that says that you do not invite into a discussion group a person who is an ideologue who's convinced himself long ago that socialism or communism or fascism or authoritarianism of some stripe is the answer. What you're looking for is people who are curious about liberty and who want to know more. But at the same time, the outreach program is also based upon the idea that many libertarians don't want to stop growing. They themselves want to continue expanding and continue inquiring into the ideas of liberty. Because I think it's very much a fundamental truth that there is no set answer to the application of liberty to the world we live. There, hopefully, and I think pretty certain saying, will never be a time when all of the answers are wrapped up in a catechetical statement that we can all memorize and know exactly what liberty tells us about every issue. I've been involved in this for pushing 20 years, and I still have a lot of problems with a couple of areas of philosophy that I honestly have still not made my mind up about. A good example is the rights of fetus. I have been everywhere on that issue over the last 20 years, and I'm not even sure 5 years down the road I still won't have a different view in terms of fetal rights, as just one particular example. But we're looking for people who are not libertarians, but who like to think and who have some curiosity about liberty. And we're looking for people who are libertarians who want to grow, who want to continue expanding. What is the discussion group? Well, the discussion group can take the form of the advocate groups. It can take the form of the program that I put together in the late 70s called the Principles of Liberty program. Or it can take the form of the book discussion group where you have people read a book, read several articles, come together, and essentially talk about the books. My guess is that as time goes on, there's going to be much more emphasis in the libertarian movement into formalizing these kinds of things as just a very fundamental part of the libertarian educational program. Now, what I want to talk about right now, and then set up a little model here, is what's that word Socratic teaching all about? Well, Socratic teaching has a variety of components. I made a list of some of them. Number one, it's non-lecture. Socratic teaching is not meant to do what I'm doing right now, pointing to a board, saying, write these things down, and talking and talking. So I sure better stop quickly. Number two, it's not meant to promote the idea that the speaker knows the truth and that the listener's job is to write it down, memorize it, and regurgitate it. Number three, the role of the discussion leader in the Socratic method is to ask questions. And I'm going to talk in a minute about 3 types of questions, and I hopefully will see these 3 types of questions used in our little model. Another thing that I tried to do this morning was the idea of synthesis, the idea that often in the Socratic teaching, what you're trying to arrive at is a blend of all of the different inputs that have come forth. Because after all, toleration and liberty are in fact blends. They're places where people come together and try to harmonize all the different interests that exist in any society. And in addition to that, the other component I would say of Socratic teaching is a hunger for knowing. The people who are in your discussion group want to know. They may already have decided that no ultimate answers are possible, but they want to move in the direction of knowledge. And they're willing to do the work and the talk and the evaluation and the judgment necessary in order to know. Now, let me talk a little bit about the program that I developed in the late 70s. This program is called Principles of Liberty. Essentially what it involves is a commitment from 6 to 12 people who are willing to meet on a regular basis. Most of the groups that have used it have done it about every 2 weeks. Some do it every week. And they commit themselves to reading and then assembling to discuss ideas of liberty. The program is divided into 7 packets. The first packet, I'll use as an example, is called Basic Principles of Liberty. It's an overview. And it consists of 5 issue papers, one on free trade, one on human rights, one on libertarianism versus socialism, one called The Public Be Damned, and one called Radicalism, the Libertarian Alternative. Now what happens in this program is that the people commit themselves to having read these issue papers before they come to the meeting. So your typical meeting opens up, people walk in the door, you say hi to everyone, and everyone has read the 5 issue papers. They sit down, the discussion leader then is in charge. The discussion leader's role is to not lecture, not to give out tests or quiz sheets, but rather to ask a series of questions which are printed on the color-coded card that's inside the packet. These questions essentially are requiring the participants to say what it is that they learned from the readings. It's essentially, how well did you understand what you read? And then you spend half the meeting going over that. Then the second half of the meeting, you flip the card over, and there are what's called questions for discussion. And the questions for discussion are very open-ended areas where you're going to get a lot of controversy, a lot of difference of opinion. And during that time, you try to arrive at some kind of consensus or some kind of a synthesis of what does liberty say about the topic. The first meeting is called the Basic Principles. The second meeting is called Issues of Economic Freedom. The third meeting is called Issues of Personal Liberty. The fourth is called Economic Issues in the Market Response. The fifth is called Foreign Affairs and Freedom. The sixth is called Individualism in Our Age. And the last 7th meeting is called Social Issues Today, which is an application to contemporary issues. Now, by the time the program's over, this particular program, people have made a commitment to do reading, have done discussion, and have completed a sequence of a course. Now, the difference between that program and the advocate group program, of course, is that Marshall's organized the advocate group in such a way that that person makes a commitment at the end. And I'm just sorry that in 1979, when I did this, when I put mine together, I didn't think of that idea. Because it seems to me that that commitment at the end of the course is a great way to sum it up and to see some kind of conclusion to it. The Principles of Liberty doesn't have that kind of commitment. A person finishes it, and then they're sort of like, well, we're done. Hopefully we've learned from it. What I want to do now is talk about technique. Each day when I teach philosophy, I walk into my classroom, and I essentially use 3 kinds of techniques. I call these questioning styles. I'll have a copy of this, by the way, for everybody here, so you want to really write this down. There's 3 kinds of questioning styles, and what you might want to do now is jot down just sort of a note on each, because I want the people who volunteer to come up and participate in this to try to incorporate these questioning styles. The first questioning style is what I call follow-up questioning. Now keep in mind, these are styles that the discussion leader uses. Now a follow-up question is when someone makes a statement, you listen carefully to their statement, and then you turn around to them and say, wait a second, you used a word there. What's that word mean? And then you ask them for a definition of that word. By doing that, you're going to kind of focus the attention of the group on the meaning of words. And I think earlier we talked about the idea of how important words are in communication. So the follow-up question is where, in fact, you as the discussion leader turn the thing around and say, what is the meaning of that word? Another follow-up technique for questioning is called the premise approach, where you say to the person who made the statement, you seem to have a certain assumption that you're using here. What is it? Kind of like look under the surface as to what you just said. Tell me your assumption. And then you force the group to focus on principles as opposed to, say, a policy level. Now, the second technique of questioning is what I call the cycling technique. This is where someone makes a statement, and the discussion leader turns to someone totally different in the group and asks the question, how would you answer that same question? Or says to the person, what assumption do you think the person you just heard speak had in what they said? So here you're getting in a situation where you're evaluating the listening skills and you're evaluating the thinking abilities of the other people in the group who are involved with the discussion at the time. So that's the second technique called cycling. Now the third technique is called examination. And that's where the discussion leader stands back from the group and asks the entire group a question and asks for someone to raise their hand or asks for someone to kind of get involved in analyzing what's just happened. Now, I found myself in my teaching at my philosophy course that if I come up with a mixture of follow-up, cycling, and examination questions, I can go through, my classes are usually an hour long, I can go through an entire class where the only thing I've really done that class period is asked questions. Very rarely will I step out of the discussion leader role and go to the blackboard and give a note, or will I, in fact, even suggest a synthesis of what in my view ought to be happening. So, the follow-up technique, the cycling technique, and the examination. A mixture of these is good. Don't get involved in too much of one or the other. Don't, for example, continually ask the rhetorical question to the group and look for the hand raised. In general, I would say you're better off calling on people at least half the time, if not more so. And particularly call on people who haven't said much, because the idea of knowledge and growth is to get the person to say something that they've been thinking about all along. Now, what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a little example. I've pulled some of my question cards out of the Principles of Liberty series, and we're going to take a look at a sample meeting. It's happening in Chicago, Illinois, at this very moment, and through the wonders of modern technology, we're transporting 3 people who are meeting in Chicago, Illinois right now, discussing Principles of Liberty, and what I need is some people to come in from Chicago, if you will, and run through a little discussion with me so I can demonstrate some of the technique. Now, what I need is some volunteers. All right, Howard, come on down. So let's have Howard sit here. All right, John? Okay, Robbie and Betty. So that's 4. We can use 4. All right, now what I want to do, all right, have a seat. You still want me over here, right, Marshall?
Pardon?
You still want the discussion leader over here, right?
Nope.
Oh, you changed?
Got changed.
Okay. Now, here's what I'm going to do. These folks have never seen before these questions that I'm going to be using for discussion. They've been sealed in a mayonnaise jar. Okay. All right. Now, the idea of this is what I want you to try to observe here is what is it that I don't permit myself to do? Because the easiest thing in the world is to say, you speak, and then I'll tell you the answer. All right, which is a very easy thing to do. Or to say, I hope she gives the right answer, and I can say, great job, let's go to the second question. All right, the idea is to use these kind of techniques. So let's start off. First question for discussion says this: can an individual ever be exploited in a purely voluntary trade? All right, now that's the question. Howard.
Well, it would seem to me sometimes we have a situation where an individual desperately needs something. And is in a position where the supply of that in those time and circumstances is very limited, which is not the general case. It could be gouged for it.
All right, gouged. What's gouged mean?
Jacked way up above what it would be under normal circumstances.
John?
Speak up, please, all the participants.
John, give me this. What is this word fairness, and how does it apply to such an example? What would fairness be in a situation like Howard's discussing here?
In my perception of fairness, fairness is a relative term that can only apply to how Howard feels about it. His concept of fairness may be different than mine. And as you apply that word fairness to exploitation, exploitation to me presumes an unfairness. And in answer to the question, yes, there can be exploitation in involuntary cooperation. And whether it's fair or not is a relative term. So,
all right, now wait a second. Betty, I hear him telling me something about the word fairness and the word just. Do you see a difference between fair and just?
I think each individual uses the word fair in their own way. I perceive just as most people perceiving something that overall everyone would consider just, whereas what I would consider fair, he might not consider fair, but just might imply a consensus that everyone would agree on. I disagree with what they said in answer to your question, however, because I feel the key phrase is purely voluntary. And I don't believe a person can be considered to be exploited if they are voluntarily agreeing to some transaction.
What's wrong with the way Howard uses the word exploitation, in your view?
I believe exploitation implies ignorance or of some facts that the person might have, or a lack of choice. And if we're talking about purely voluntary transactions, you do have freedom of choice.
So choice equals non-exploitive, the way you say it.
To me, yes.
All right. Robbie, can you think of an example of a context, a model, where a person had free choice but still was exploited?
When we look at justice and fairness, exploitation of the individual, it has always been the premise in which I worked and talked to people, is that they were only exploited when they allowed themselves to be exploited. Actually, some people desire to be exploited. This is what they wish to have. On the other hand, there are those who have enough self-esteem that they are able to recover quickly and recoil to the exploitation in such a manner that they recover so quickly that they can present themselves calm and project into the question in such a way that they are able to understand the whole question at the moment, and it might appear to the individual, those around, that they are being exploited, yet inwardly they have this sense of being able to understand the question and have the answer for themselves.
Now I'm looking at Howard here, and I think he's convinced. I think he still sees exploitation possible even when it's voluntary. Am I right?
Yeah, the key word, the thing is the definition of exploitation. What does exploitation mean?
All right. What is there about the comments you've heard here that bothers you in contrast to your definition of exploitation? What have you heard said that sort of says they're too narrowly defining exploitation?
Well, they're saying that because it is a voluntary exchange, that precludes some person taking advantage of a situation.
Okay.
And
we got to be careful though.
Exploitation to me involves unethical behavior.
More than just is it voluntary or not.
Yeah.
All right, now let me set up an example. And I want to see how the four of you react to it. You're out in the middle of the desert, haven't had water for 5-6 days. And you're crawling. You get to the top of a sand dune and you look down, and there is the Ernsberger Kool-Aid stand. I've got my Kool-Aid. I even have plain water. And you crawl to my Kool-Aid stand and you're asking for something to drink. And I look down and I notice a diamond ring on your finger. 1 carat diamond ring. I look at it and I said, are you in luck? Special sale today. 1 glass of water for 1 diamond ring. You say to yourself, I need this water. You take the diamond ring off your hand, hand it to me. Voluntary trade occurs. Later on, you say to yourself, I have been exploited. Arnsberger has done it. He's one of those profit-maximizing libertarians, and he's made a diamond ring, 1 carat diamond ring for 1 glass of water. Now, my question to John, did exploitation occur?
To most people's definition, yes, it did occur. And it was still a voluntary transaction, and I don't know that exploitation is wrong. But you're precluding that there's a sense here that exploitation is wrong, and I'm not sure that it's...
Defend the exploitation. When is exploitation, in fact, not wrong?
Well, an excellent example would be when Willie Nelson was put in a real-world example. When he was an up-and-coming music writer, he would go into local bars or whatever and would sell his songs for $100. And then the person who would buy a song would go just make thousands and thousands of dollars with that. And he would sell it off because he needed $100 or $150. And that's how he operated in the beginning. Now, was Willie Nelson exploited? Well, yeah. I mean, here's somebody who made outrageous money and Willie got $100 out of it. And that's, but he did it willingly, in cooperation. Maybe that's where he got his name Willie.
Okay. Was that glass of water worth your diamond ring?
Under those circumstances, yes, I would think so. I still don't agree with the use of the word exploitation. I think it just brings in a lot of super negative connotations, and I think if both parties to the transaction are fully aware of the circumstances and fully aware that they have a choice, if one person goes for a bad deal, shall we say, I personally would not call it exploitation. Bad deal or some other label, because exploitation to me means that one party did not know some vital information or didn't have a choice.
Are you suggesting that exploitation equals rights violation?
Yes.
Now, John, defend your view here. You're saying libertarians might just as well say exploitation is sometimes okay.
Yeah, I do not subscribe to the notion that you attach right or wrong to an action, that there's an action. And right or wrong, fairness is a judgment about that action. And at the time you did it, you might have thought it was fair. And later in retrospect, you may change your mind about that. There's a human tendency to people, it's explained like people don't mind being conned, they just don't want other people to know it. Okay? And it comes in retrospect. When they have a conversation about, you gave up a diamond ring for a glass of water, you fool. You were exploited. Oh, well, at the time, it was perfectly beneficial transaction.
All right. Now let's stop
here.
Right or wrong. Let's stop here. Now, hopefully what I was trying to do there is to mix up my usage of returning to the person who just spoke, shifting to another person to focus on the person who just spoke, and then the general question to the group. I didn't keep a mental track, but hopefully I was trying to do 2 of each, but I'll look at the tape and see how I did on that. What I want now, though, is to play a little bit of a role playing here. I need to have a discussion leader come up, take another question on this card, and try their hand at it. All right? You've got to volunteer. All right.
I really want to do this because this is not my strength.
All right, now.
Well, just take your time. These are the one, like 4 or 5 answers.
All right, now, once again, these 4 folks have never seen this question, nor has Dottie, in fact. And what I want to do is see how she does this. And I'm going to use the device. Where's my little device? I'm going to do as best as I'm able to keep track of times when Dottie uses, let's call it, good, solid Socratic methodology. And also, if Dottie allows herself to fall into the I'm on the pulpit kind of methodology. Let's see, we use on the pulpit,
and we'll use small plug for the good solid Socratic terminology. All right?
I'd like you to do that because I really want to know, I'm going to be trying to concentrate on the discussion as well as on the method, and I'd like to know, have the feedback.
And in fact, when we get some other people, maybe we could just have the entire group, everybody's got vertical lessons.
Sure, yeah.
Really doing All right, take a try on this, let's see what happens.
Okay, let's address question 5 here on our discussion now. Let me read it to you. Why should each of us respect the rights of others? If we can get away with violating another person's rights, would it be in our self-interest to do so? Okay, you want to hear it again? Yes? Why should each of us respect the rights of others? If we can get away with violating another person's rights, would it be in our self-interest to do so? Anybody have a comment to start off the discussion?
You can gain
Howard.
short-range advantage by violating someone's right, but aside from the fact that everyone does that, the whole civilization deteriorates. But it's sort of an altruistic position, but my observation is when I have violated another person's rights, and I have, it comes back to haunt me.
So you're saying you get a short range, you're making a distinction between short and long range advantage, and you can get
Immediate
it.
gratification versus longer-term benefit.
Okay, John, do you think that's one of the important differences we'd be dealing with in answering this question, short and long range advantage?
When I look at that, I'm reminded of the boomerang, and that whatever you send out is going to come back. So it's in our own interest to only send out those things that we really want to come back. And if I now have assumed the posture that I can violate somebody else's rights for my own gain, what's to prevent them from doing the same to me? And when you set up a structure where that's allowed to exist, then the whole thing collapses. It's a society. And so I perceive my rights as it's a protection of my rights, not to violate somebody else's rights. Even though I may, as Howard says, gain in the short run.
Betty, you look like you're agreeing with that. I want to hear
I
your
agree
comments.
with both what Howard and John are saying, but I think we need to step back and look at the larger issue. Overall, it is immoral to violate another person's rights, and that's why we shouldn't do it.
So you're bringing up the issue that what
Principle.
the principle here is important,
Yes,
and that morality is really what we're dealing with.
I believe so.
Yeah, but don't you think, she's throwing in a buzzword, morality. We haven't defined morality.
Well, all right, let's ask Betty and get her definition. That's a good point. What's your definition, Betty?
Of morality?
Yeah. Tough one, right?
I view morality as a set of standards by which a person chooses to live, a set of values by which he or she chooses to base his decision on actions to take or not to take.
Well,
And it's different for different people.
Yeah, I'm sure Stalin and Hitler had a set of values.
I
operated from.
severely doubt it. I really doubt that they gave much thought to it.
Well, let's get Robbie. Robbie doesn't.
I think it relates a lot to the matter of choice, as Betty was saying. It's what we choose to do. And when we make a...
Wait a minute. You talking about morality, or are you talking about should we respect the rights of others?
Well, I'm talking
Okay.
about morality.
Okay.
If we choose, everyone has the ability to perform acts of morality, if they choose to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the whole question is related on the personal choice. For when a person makes a personal choice, he then has to bear the responsibility of his choice. So this could go back, if I violate his rights by choice, then I must assume the responsibility for that violation. And I think this should come into the picture of whether or not we're going to actually violate another's civil rights.
So let's all deal with what Ravi just brought up here. Then, is it correct, or let me just get this back in my head again. I have to go back and ask you again, because you mentioned choice, and you mentioned the self-interest. All right, now I've got it. What you're saying is we take the responsibility of our choices. So let's all look at this question then. If that's true, that we take the responsibility for our choices and they have to go together in a moral world, then would it be in our self-interest to choose to violate somebody else's rights?
Well, this would depend upon your interpretation of morals. Now, some may have the interpretation of morals that would allow them to do as they wish to do, according to my rights. Then, on the other hand, the choice and its responsibility could be that equation which allows Howard to have the flashback and feel bad about his choice in the long term.
But you just mentioned the choice and the responsibility. Now, Howard, do you think that the response, if someone does take that choice, then what happens to the responsibility?
If you make the choice to violate someone?
Mm-hmm. If that's your choice, as Ravi was just mentioning, then what about that responsibility? What happens? What do you think happens in the world when somebody chooses to violate the rights of somebody else? How does the responsibility come into the picture?
Well, it's almost there by definition that you have responsibility for your actions.
Okay.
You're violating the rights of others. System of principles that Libertarian might believe in would be violated. But just exactly what Benny said, Hitler had a moral position, and the moral position was based on the superiority of the Aryan race. Now, I don't agree with that, but then he had a set of morality doing that.
Now, let's stop right here. Next thing we're going to do, notice not a single glass coin. So you're straining yourselves on an answer. Now, what is the real answer? I have a question for Marshall. Do you want to try to capture on camera our little group session, or are you going to just do
One of the groups, and whatever group that you're observing will pick it up on your microphone.
Okay. And here's what we're going to do next. We will change the pace here. We've been sitting in this horseshoe pattern, which is a good one for this program, but we're going to change a little bit. What I want to do is I want to take these three. How about like 6 people, and put your chairs in a little circle right here. All right. And then I want to take. Would you like to join us? Okay. Why don't you go to yeah, go on over. And then why don't we take the people on the we got the people in the back, but we don't want the camera. We'll get Marshall in this. Marshall wants to do a little group cluster together in the former location of the keys.
All right.
And then why don't we take about the first, let's do this. Why don't you all return to where you were, and we'll do it right up that way. Thanks a lot. And then why don't we take these 5 right here, we'll cut off the body. Put a little circle over near that doorway. And then we've got one down the dotty. And right over here, let's just say just behind Henry. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come around and pick one person as discussion leader and give them a card. And let's just play around a little bit with the techniques until Marshall tells us that we're out of time. All right.
By the way, a quick announcement. On our tour this afternoon, we're still close enough on schedule because we had an extra 20 to 25 minutes added in there. So for those of you that are going on the tour of Cato and IHS and Citizens for a Sound Economy, we're tracking along fine on that. So,
All right. You'll be
Here's the 5 questions. Take whatever you need. And the thing is, tell everybody else, don't ever allow him to give his opinion. So make sure he can't even think.
Now, at this portion of the program, what I'm trying to do is I've divided the group up into 4 separate discussion groups, and I'm having them take some of the Principles of Liberty cards and run through a sample of exactly what it is that happens during the discussion. In each case, I gave one person the job of discussion leader, and hopefully this time they're asking the questions and deliberately not lecturing, they're not giving their own opinions, but rather what they're doing is they're soliciting questions, asking, bombarding the other participants with challenges to their logic, and essentially creating an environment where open discussion and thinking occurs. And this is what's supposed to happen during all 7 weeks of the Principles of Liberty course. And hopefully after about 10 minutes of this, people will get a little bit more of a sense that they can go home, gather some people together, and put together their own Principles of Liberty program and educate people in libertarian philosophy.